Hey, peeps and geeks, and welcome to the other side of cyber, episode 2. I nearly did that, which would be episode 4, which isn't really a good thing to do. I'm only halfway through my second coffee of the day, and the lovely James Azar is joining us from the other side of the world, and we've just discussed where it's freezing cold there today, James. Welcome to the show.
Welcome to the other side of cyber, folks. Thanks so much for tuning in. So
it's going to be huge today. So the way we're doing our awesome shows is we're going to pick a topic, and usually a big cyber incident, attack situation that's occurred in the past. We can't yet look in our crystal ball and see what's coming. When we can, that'll be huge. But what we're going to do today is James is going to take us through quite an extraordinary event that occurred in 2014 with the JP Morgan breach. So I'm not going to steal any thunder. I've done some research, and let me tell you, this is fascinating. It's on multi-levels. We will be focusing, as usual, about what we talk about is the other side, the human element, and how it's affected the people. Without further ado, James, I will hand over to you.
So, yeah, before we get started on today's breach, I want to say a few things. And before we go into, welcome to episode number 2 of The Other Side of Cyber. If you're not subscribed, please do so now. We have our own YouTube channel. Go to The Other Side of Cyber. Every subscriber gets us closer to the goal we want to get to.
Yes.
So help us get there. And let's get to 100 subscribers on our YouTube channel.
Okay, cool.
Right. And then we'll take it from there. We're very excited about that. So please subscribe. The show is alive, and it's not just JJ and I bantering. It's also for you to ask questions. For those watching us on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, good morning to our Asia Pacific crowd. I hope y'all are doing well. I'm
y'all.
Like JJ was saying, y'all. It's a Southern thing. It's a Georgia thing, right?
Okay.
It's y'all, like, you ever seen like Rush Hour? Chris Tucker trying to teach Jackie Chan. We'd all, and he's like y'all.
How you's doing? How you all doing? How you's like?
Yeah.
YOOZE use.
Tuning into this podcast, you'll learn how to speak English in Australian and in a US style of English, so we can bridge those gaps. And JJ and I are very excited about this show, and we have some great plans. Today, we're going to talk about a very, I want to say, at the time when this breach happened, it was the biggest breach of its time.
It was
significant. And it was also very, very sophisticated. And we're going to talk about that. The idea here is we're not a behind-the-scenes crime podcast.
No.
We're not here to talk about the hackers and the motive, although we'll briefly touch on that. We're here to talk about the human element of it. This breach impacted in victimhood about 83 million people, impacting 76 million households. And if an average household in America has 4 people, you can do the math. That's over 300 million people.
Jeez.
So we've got someone already commenting. I don't know if you see that, but it says Aussie, Aussie, Aussie. I don't know who that is. We're going to have to find out here in just a second.
So the most important thing with that, James, is when someone says Aussie, 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 the correct response is oi, oi, oi. So you must remember that for future reference.
Oi, oi. Okay,
oi,
that's
O-I, O-I, O-I. Aussie, Aussie, Aussie. Oi, oi, oi. It's what we do. Thank you, LinkedIn user who has no name. We'll find you eventually.
Well, I'm finding him right now. I think it's Charles P. That's who it is.
Hi,
it's Charles P. Hello, Charles P. So yeah, I love the people that have like their privacy on LinkedIn. They're like, you don't know who I am. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Nothing is private anymore. Yes, Charles P. Nothing is private anymore.
So what we need is someone else to respond with oi, oi, oi in the comments, and then it's all good. And as James said, this is live. So ask questions, make your comments. You will feature.
The show is on. So let's get right into our story today. So the way the show is put out for you folks here is we're going to spend the next 10-15 minutes talking a little bit about some of the facts of the breach and what it really means. JJ and I are going to banter back and forth. You guys can tune in anytime you want with questions or comments and so forth. And we'll do that. So before we get started, sup y'all. Sup, Charles. See, that's now what he's doing is he's using the Southern slang, sup, like
y'all.
What's up, right? Like y'all, everyone.
What is happening today, everybody? Is that better? Which is sup y'all.
No. You just say sup y'all.
No, I'm doing the translation, James.
Oh, you're doing the Aussie translation. Okay.
British English. Hello, everybody. How are you all today?
See, and we've shortened it to 2 words.
I agree. Sup, y'all.
Sup, y'all. It's brilliant. Thank you, Charles. Charles today is being an Aussie and an American. I love it. All right. So let's talk a little bit about JP Morgan Chase. In 2014, JP Morgan Chase was the top bank in the nation and internationally. JP Morgan and Chase had a $55 billion market valuation at the time. And it was cruising. It was at the very beginning of the trend of internet banking.
Okay.
2014 was the very beginning of it. This breach, which was announced publicly on October 2nd of 2014, was significant. It was significant because at the time, this was the largest breach in U.S. history. In fact, up until the Equifax breach in 2017, JP Morgan Chase had held that title for almost 3 full years. It was 2 years, 11 months, and about 8 days.
And from a technology point of view, that's an eternity, if you think about it.
Yeah, that's a very, very long time, right? And what's very interesting about the breach was they weren't really required to report it because no financial data at the time was compromised. So here's the interesting part of this breach.
Then? What was
names?
Yep.
Phone number, email addresses, PII.
Number, email. Okay. Home address?
Yep.
All right.
PII. So JP Morgan Chase wasn't technically in room to disclose it. They didn't have to. Because under regulation, unless financial data was compromised, it didn't have to do any of that.
Yeah, good point.
So story goes on. Right. So the attack really started in 2013. It not only impacted JP Morgan and Chase, it also impacted 5 or 6 other companies, all within the trading industry and all with the same type of data, meaning name, phone number, email, home address, part of the portfolio, and so forth, meaning they weren't looking for bank accounts. They were looking for people who actually had trading accounts that were trading on the stock market. And we'll get to that in just a minute and explain what that means. Because that's a very interesting aspect. We always ask ourselves, today we see a ransomware attack.
Yeah.
And we go, all right, a ransomware attack is, me holding you for ransom to get money. What was the motivation behind this one? Because I think in all actuality, up until this day, this group may have made out with the most amount of money than any ransomware.
How'd they do that?
So we'll explain here in just a moment. But before we do that, a quick commercial. I'm kidding. We don't have any commercial breaks.
I'm trying to think, what have I got that we could do a commercial for? Nothing. It's hair clip. It's proudly brought
Please
to you.
subscribe to our podcast.
Do I do that? This is a hair clip.
And dolphins are evil.
They're not.
All right. So the breach itself took JP Morgan and Chase around 2 months to figure out what was going on. It later figured out that it actually went back a little bit longer, but they were in for about 6 months, but for 2 months they were exfiltrating data.
Now, exfiltrating data, for those that might not be aware of what that means, you can logically work it out from a language point of view, but they just take out the data they want.
Yes. So they started exfiltrating the data and essentially collecting it. Now, here's the aspect of this. They went through, they were able to get high administrative privileges. So think of like the most sophisticated privileges, and get into 90 different servers. And they went through the entire database. So they literally had access to everything, and they were essentially in an ocean swimming. Think of, being invisible in water, going fishing, and the fish don't see you, and you've got your pick of what fish you want to go after for dinner that day.
And being in a system or 90 servers for a few months without detection, that is extraordinary. I remember a statistic. It's on average over nearly 250-ish days that hackers will spend inside systems before they are found. It's not that easy to know that they're in there, which I find extraordinary, but that's what it is.
It's a very interesting piece here with the JP Morgan Chase thing, which is they discovered it fairly quickly from the moment the data got started exfiltrating, which was around 90 days at the time.
Wow.
So the hackers were really able to move around the network laterally. Today, if we compare that, that's exactly what we're seeing with the SolarWinds story, right? Where, they've been able to move around and do whatever they wanted to do and so forth. So let's get into what this really means, okay? Because this breach itself impacted 76 million households in the US. 76 million. So over 300 million people, that's nearly the entire US population, was impacted by this breach. It was massive in scale. So here's what these guys did, okay? These guys infiltrated JP Morgan Chase, Scottrade, E-Trade, and a bunch of those organizations. They exfiltrated not sensitive data, but just name, phone number, email address, home address, and more or less they looked and studied their account activity. They data mined very effectively. I've read several depositions from this case. By the way, that's just now some of these guys are getting sentenced.
Yeah,
and we'll get to that. This case has been going in court since 2015, I believe. And this case led to an international task force. So we'll get to that in also a minute. They took all those names and people who knew were active in the stock market. They then turned around and acquired penny stock and other stock on the stock market. And then they were emailing these customers on behalf of the bank or the trading platform, offering them these magnificent deals to buy these very, very cheap stocks. They were essentially doing something called pump and dump. I buy a company that's on the stock market that has no value, no product. I create a backstory. I push it out. They were able to do all of that and push it out to active people who were on the stock market, and they had a call center to back it up. They had email marketing. They had automated email marketing to do this kind of stuff. It was, speaking to several FBI agents, they said this was extremely, extremely sophisticated.
So these aren't and this is something and I know other people in the cyber community are also trying to do this, remove this vision of the hacker with the hoodie in the basement on the computer, mum and dad's, basement pizza being delivered. These are professionals. These are just like any other organization you can think of. They're probably actually more sophisticated than some, especially with their communication and collaboration. What we're seeing here is a ridiculous level of professional work. This is not for shits and giggles. This is real stuff.
It is. And it's estimated by the FBI that over $2 billion were moved through the market.
Because of this?
Yes.
How do they track that type of thing?
So what they were able to track is what stocks, how many people invested in those stocks, how much money was vested. As of now, they've only been able to recover just a little over 400 million.
Wow.
So 1.6 billion is somewhere out there. This is an alleged number. Again, the indictments don't really talk about a final number, but speaking to several people who've investigated this, it's around 2 billion.
In 2014, there was the Target hack in America and also Home Depot.
That was a month after this.
Yeah, and when I had a look at the data captured from all, there was considerable information taken from Target, not Australian Target, American Target, and that had credit card details, etc. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to think if you get that data and match it with the JP Morgan data and the Home Depot data, because all of it ends up on the dark web at some point for sale, match them all up, and that harmless PII that was taken by JP Morgan, all of a sudden has a whole lot more value if you can actually match it up with other information that's been gathered from other hacks. And I think from a human element point of view, people forget that it's not in isolation. The cyber criminals share their info. They sell it, yes, they make money, but often they'll give it away because it's adding on. It's like blocks, building blocks of info, just like social media. We spoke in episode 1 about privacy and the data that's collected on us all. Add that to this kind of information, it doesn't take long to understand how your profile can be built in such a way that targeting you, if someone wanted to, is not that hard to do if you want to pay for the information, and then you just got to be a little bit clever about how you do it. It's terrifying.
It is, and this specific scenario was very fascinating because they ran it as a business. In fact, the only reason there's a few reasons they got caught, and we won't get into that too much, but the discovery of the breach pointed to Russia early on.
Yep.
And this formed an international multi-department task force of FBI, Department of Justice, the SEC, the CFTC. So for those who don't know what all those initials are, FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I don't know what the Australian equivalent to the FBI is. What would be the Australian equivalent to the FBI?
Oh, I've got ASIO, probably, I would say.
Department of Justice is the Department of Justice. The SEC is the Securities Exchange Commission, like ASIC in Australia, and the Commodities Future Trade Commission, the CFTC, was also part of this investigation as well. And it was a very, very interesting aspect because when they started investigating this crime, it turned from Russia quickly to nations where we in the US have an extradition treaty with them. The hackers were essentially 4 people, and now it's 5. The original 4 that were arrested shortly after, there's 5 of them. 2 are Russian, one's an American, and the other 2 are Israelis.
Yep.
And it was what happened thereafter is this launched an investigation where an American task force, along with several others, were in Israel for months investigating the 2 Israelis. And were monitoring them. And eventually, nearly just shortly of a year before the breach, they were arrested. They were arrested July 21st of 2015. Both Gary Shalom, who was the head of it, and 41-year-old Ziv Ornstein were arrested in Israel at a 5 a.m. dawn raid joint between Laha 443 out of Israel, which is Israel's cyber crime unit, and they investigate. It's a very, very advanced unit within the Israeli law enforcement agency, and along with FBI, Department of Justice, and SEC officers.
Wow. Why is it so challenging? And this is something I get asked a lot, and I don't have the answer. Why is it so hard to track down the cyber criminal? I know they're global. They've got, we don't actually know where they are most of the time. Why is it so challenging?
So one, in this specific case, they were in states where we have in the US, and I mean, when I say we, the US, for our people watching, is they were in countries where we had law enforcement cooperation, intelligence cooperation.
Okay.
Just for example, there's still one of the culprits of this breach who's still at large in Russia.
Okay.
Right? So there's two Israelis and American. The American, who at the time of the arrests was able to slip away and go to Russia, overstayed his visa in Russia, was in jail in Moscow, and then was like, all right, I'll just go back and face the music, because apparently no one wants to be in jail in Russia. So, and that was Joshua Aaron, who was part of it. And so we don't want to get into the hackers per se. These were the guys. The case is still ongoing. There's some information we can't really talk about because it's still part of it. I know that one of the hackers was just sentenced, literally just a few weeks ago. He was sentenced, I believe, to 10 years in prison. And this person who was the other hacker, the Russian guy who essentially did everything from Russia, his name was Andre. Andre spent, after this breach, he kind of turned white hat.
Okay, well, that's good.
And was trying to do good. In fact, I read his statement to the court at his sentencing, and he goes, I deserve what I'm about to get. I've cheated a lot of people. And let's talk about that for a second, because this breach isn't about the cyber criminals who did it. And it's about the good folks at JP Morgan Chase who found out about this and were victims of this crime. But it's about the sophistication of using the victim to victimize your other victims. So they didn't steal $1 from JP Morgan Chase. They didn't take $1 from a JP Morgan Chase account. Everything they took was from hard working people who were simply looking to invest in good opportunities to grow their wealth and their personal finance and improve their lives.
You know, what I found amazing, James, was when I went through all these articles, and as much we do research for these shows, folks. We're not just turning up and saying, oh, what are we talking about today? Because we want to make sure that we have a really compelling story, and at the other side, is there enough to really talk about the human element? And what I found in all of this stuff was the lack of what James just mentioned. Those people who, the hardworking people, it was all about what JP Morgan are doing and what money they're spending, tripling their cyber costs, whatever it might be. There really wasn't a lot talking about how this type of thing affects the day-to-day person. And back then, when I read all of the information that was available, which was, very repetitive, granted, because it's news, so they often use the same information. It was like reading from something today. There really wasn't much difference at all. The human element, even from then till now, from 2014 to 2021, there's not enough of the focus of that fallout, that human element. We care about these organizations because they have our data. But like James said, these hardworking people, they were just trying to get on with life. And even if they lost $500, to them, it could have been all that they had. So why isn't there, after all these years, James, that we still haven't worked out that it's the human element we have to look at as well? Why have we missed that in this cyber world?
Yeah, there's the reason we do that is because typically what we highlight, what the media highlights, is the victim. And here there were multiple victims. So JP Morgan Chase in that company was a victim. Now, to JP Morgan Chase's credit, they didn't change leadership. They didn't fire their CISO. Yep. They didn't do any of the things that I typically criticize a company for. But the media forgot about the 300 million Americans of 76 million households that were impacted by this breach, not just by data. So not every single one of those 76 million households invested in the pump and dump schemes. But let's say, for the sake of argument, 10% did. So that's 7.6 million households. That's, say, what, 30 million people?
Yeah, and let's say that's $500 each. You know, not a lot.
Well, I mean, it's estimated that they did $2 billion in this fraud. So that's a little bit, I mean, your numbers aren't far off. If they converted 10% of those, if they took that list of 76 million households, 76 million households that impacted 83 million people. So 76 million households, 83 million people. That could be a husband and wife who reside in the same household, or mother and daughter who reside in the same household, or wife and wife, or husband and husband. So just want to be very clear. We're not
completely inclusive.
Very inclusive of this. Okay. And they used very basic data, which Charles brings up here. Let's bring in a comment real quick. So stupendous point. PII is an asset whose value, once shared, is shared with any threat actor with access to that platform. And that's an excellent point, Charles. You're absolutely right. There's a PII may seem harmless. Well, it's not a credit card information, but what they did is they played on something that we all as humans have: trust. I trust you, JJ. If I get an email from JJ with a link somewhere, chances are I'm probably going to click it. So when I'm a JP Morgan Chase investment customer, or I'm an E-Trade customer, or Scott Trade customer, and I get an email that says, here's an excellent, amazing investment opportunity for you, JJ.
Yeah.
You know, all you need is $1,000. All you need is $1,500. And we know you've got the money, right? Because you have a trading account with us. So all it is selling maybe stock somewhere else and buying this stock, because this stock has greater upside. That stock only gives you 4%. This stock's going to give you 40%.
And look, it's a numbers game. So they would have sent it all out, and this is what cyber criminals do. In a situation like this, they're not looking for one or two people. They could send it out to all 70 odd million. And wasn't there also around 8 million businesses involved in this as well?
Correct. And there were about 8.5 million businesses. Many of those businesses were businesses that were trading because it was part of the business, meaning they weren't a trading business, but let's say they were in farming or jewelry. So they would hedge specific things in the market. So if I've got a lot of gold on hand, I'm probably going to hedge it, so that way if there's any market fluctuation, I'm able to withstand that fluctuation.
So these people, they're used to the language, and these cyber criminals weren't backyarders. They were professional. They knew how to approach it, what to do. They were clearly successful. I'd like to, if I may, James, and this will be an interesting one. I had a look at how this happened. So I wanted to know, well, because in my world, whenever I do research, it seems to be that some little person with a little finger clicked on something that they shouldn't have because they weren't aware. They, didn't trust that email from JJ because they thought, hold on a minute, let me just check. So they checked that link to see that, oh, no, that doesn't look legitimate. That's suspicious. So from what I've seen, this has come down to cyber criminals targeting employees of JP Morgan on their personal computers. Because it's not hard. You can find details of who works where quite easily. And back in those days, you could probably walk in and pick up a printed copy or download a list of everybody who worked in the organization and just find them. It's not hard. And so is that the case? Was it actually a phishing email that someone did engage with, unfortunately, who worked at JP Morgan, who allowed the cyber criminals into the system? Is that the case?
So here's the deal. We can always look at a person clicking on something to make something breachable. I don't think the humans here were as much to blame because you're today, we're talking about this 6.5 years later.
Yeah.
But
they're still getting them through phishing emails.
Yeah, but phishing's always going to be there. And I think phishing is something we have to learn to live with. Right? And we can't, you can't train humans. I disagree with the notion that you can train humans to be more aware. And I know that's kind of contradictory to some things, but you can teach a human to be aware at a specific point period in time to increase their awareness. You're not going to make them foolproof. You're not going to make them mistake proof.
We're human, so it's not possible to do that. It's no different than the driving. We still need to pay attention to everything on the road. Otherwise, there'll be an accident. So it's the same thing in cyber.
Correct. Justin Berman, who's a good friend of mine, who's the head of cyber at Dropbox, we did a podcast last year at RSA together for the CISO Talk podcast. And we talked about, he brought up a very excellent point that I strongly believe in, which is we can't try to get humans to catch up to technology. We got to get technology to catch up to humans. And there's a truth to that, right? Yeah. So in 2014, yes, it appears that someone clicked on some sort of phishing link that came through that gave them access to their to the network.
Crown jewels. Yeah.
Right. Well, not really the crown jewels, but it could have given them access. They could have moved laterally. Listen, there's not a lot of details because this is still under indictment. The court cases are still going on. There's information that I've seen from court filings that I can't share because it's still under seal, and I don't feel like having the FBI knocking on my door tomorrow. As much as I love those guys and they're great folks, I don't want to get that knock on the door for violating anything.
If you were doing a live podcast at the time with a live show, that would be interesting to see the FBI come charging him, but not today.
Right. And so there's a lot of aspects to this where, people will talk about the motive. I don't really care for the motive. The motive is always greed, right? The motive is always money. The motive is always...
I disagree with that based on all of the different motives that we have as humans. So whilst we always talk about money, there's that notoriety within the group of cyber criminals. There's the thrill of the chase, of the winning, of getting in and doing. There's the let's not get caught. So there's the risk-taking element. Whilst money is the end result, the motivation to get to the money, I think is really varied based on we're all so different. We're all very different.
We are very different people, and we look at things very, very differently over a period of time. I think we have to look at this breach, and again, for all of those watching live, you can ask any questions or let us know what you think of this breach altogether. I'm sure some of you may be, looking this up on DuckDuckGo because you know that Google spies after you, so you're using a more reliable platform than Google to do your search. But
by the way, all views are personal views on this podcast, this show, this live extravaganza of the other side of cyber people. So keep that in mind. James and I very much like to speak our minds and share our personal opinions. And we often disagree, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, where we disagree right now is you kind of want to look at the human element and you want to go, what behavior did the human take to make this happen? And I want to look at this.
It happened. It doesn't really matter how. My research showed that that's how they, got through. Whether it be, you haven't locked your windows on your house, but you've got a big padlock on your front door. If you don't lock your windows, then they're going to get through the window. So you have to look at all elements. Right. But all of the media, all of the reports, all of the outcomes, the fallout of this, focused on the technology elements of what everybody should be doing to protect their servers, their data, their information from a future breach. And all I was thinking while I was reading it, because I'm very human element driven, where are we talking about helping the people, those that were affected? Like, what are we doing to help them? And what are we doing for the people that work at JP Morgan so that they can be more aware of what is going on out there?
So, JP Morgan Chase literally, I think, doubled or tripled their cybersecurity budget after this breach. I mean, they lost a lot of money. I mean, their revenue dropped but by nearly, I think it's $2 billion from the moment of the breach was notified. The revenue dropped significantly, and their market cap, their net income dropped by about $600 million. So that had a wide range in a very significant impact on JP Morgan Chase, a significant impact on JP Morgan Chase.
But there was nothing that mentioned that they were going to spend any time on their people, their employees, their users.
Well, I don't think they need to. And again, I think this comes back to, if you lose a battle in the military, you're not going to really tell your opponent how you're going to fix it, right?
From a point of view, I think I disagree on that point, James, because if it happened here and people say, oh, look, we're not going to tell you how we're going to fix it, just trust us. You've lost our trust because someone got into your system and they've got my data now. So if you tell me that you're going to reinforce your technology by spending money, getting a big team, doing this, that, and you're going to spend some time educating your people to support this whole program, I feel better about that. Would you?
You know, so I come from the practitioner side.
Exactly.
And I'm all for having private conversations with people who inquiring minds want to know, at a level where I'm comfortable sharing just enough to win their confidence, but not enough to put all my cards on the table. And so I'm going to stick to my stand that we don't always have to tell what's going on, right? That we can, not from a transparency issue. I'm all for a transparency of what happened, right? Of how they moved in the network. We know that they had a server in Egypt that they were really using for all of this, that they disowned. We know that they had servers in the Ukraine and in other parts of the world that they were using in the time that they were in the system for JP Morgan Chase. I'm all for knowing those things because that helps me identify if they, got into my system. How I fix it, on the other hand, I don't know that I want to, and in the specifics of how I do it, I don't know that I want to put it out there. Okay. And I think I think there's an aspect of, we have to now expect the fact that any business that we do business with is going to go through a cyber incident. Yeah. What's going to determine if I'm going to keep doing business with them is going to be the response to that incident. So
if that happened today, what do you think would happen if the 2014 JP Morgan breach occurred today? What do you think would happen? Would there be any difference in how we responded as users, as consumers, as their customers? Do you think there'd be any difference?
So I think in today's world, there would be a significant difference in how people react to it.
Yep.
I think they lost more business in 2014, and they would lose a lot less business if they happened today. Their stock also wouldn't have been impacted as bad today as it would have been in 2014. So I think they were better off having this breach happen today than in 2014. Remember, this was the first massive breach in U.S. history. It was the largest financial breach. And up until Equifax, which could be considered financial, right, was the largest breach, almost twice the size of JP Morgan Chase. So from that aspect,
people are more demanding of protecting my data now than they would have been in 2014. So interestingly, I thought it would be worse for them today. But what you said makes sense as well. It's like, well, we don't want to test it out, so we don't want to find out what the difference would be.
Well, I don't know that they would have reported. I think the only reason they reported the breach, by the way, and I don't know this for sure, and we're going to get, Charles has another question for us here. We're going to pull up here in just a moment. I'll tell you this. I think the reason they reported it is because of the pump and dump scheme, and they didn't know how far it went. And they needed the public to come through with more information in order to investigate the depth of this specific breach. And to see really what its impact was, because for all purposes, they stole no money from JP Morgan Chase.
Wow.
right? So it wasn't like they hacked into JP Morgan Chase, went into their, wire transfer system, said JP Morgan Chase to blah, blah, blah company and blah, blah, blah place, $150 million. Enter. It's not what they did.
And they knew they'd get more out of targeting the average person than they would trying the other way. They'd get caught faster. Whereas they could take that data, that exfiltration of data, move on to their next project and not worry about their systems at JP Morgan anymore.
Yeah, so Charles P. here has a wonderful question, which is threat actors have a massive open source information network. How can blue teams compete with that? So we have to stop playing reactive cyber and start to playing proactive cyber.
Can we just mention blue teams for people who might not know what
so blue teams are defense, right? So I'm going to use, Charles appears to be from the U.S. and for our Aussie fans, we're going to talk a little American football. Yeah, unfortunately, but I don't know. It's a great sport. I don't know why you guys don't like it over there.
Basketball? But we understand that here.
Yeah, but there's no. So I'll tell you what it is. Okay, let's use a basketball example. Okay, fine.
Thank you.
So blue teams are essentially the defensive side. Every organization has something called a red team, which is the offensive side. They're thinking of how to break into systems, and blue teams are thinking of how to keep them out. Okay. Defense never wins games.
No.
Because when you lay back and you're playing defense, you're allowing people to attack you. So that's why in close basketball games, full court press or half court press and not sitting around the arc waiting for the team to come up, right? Especially in today's NBA where people shoot from 30 feet away and hit a three-pointer, right? It's that concept right there of cyber, where we have to be in a full court press as a blue team all the time. And we can't just be reactive to what the red teams are doing or what our adversaries are doing. We have to be very proactive in the way we build almost traps for them. I'm a big fan of deception in blue teams. I'm a big fan of integrating deception technology with blue teams and allowing blue teams to build a bunch of different honeypots, which are essentially traps. Deception is a trap for a threat actor so that they can come in and they think what they're seeing is real, but it's really an illusion. Think of like being in a hall of mirrors. Like if you've never been in a hall of mirrors and you're trying to find someone, you see them and you don't know where they're at. And you see that a lot in movies, but you should do it yourself. It's amazing. So Charles, here's what I would do. And I know you've got some really brilliant minds at where you're at. I know Jason Peters and a bunch of these guys over there are magnificent at where you're at. You guys, we have to start thinking of how we become really proactive, setting up these honeypots, bringing these guys in, seeing how they move, and then identifying it. I like to take stuff and compare it to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Right. Yeah. So I'll take specific stuff and I'll map it to what they're doing. And I'll look at that through a MITRE ATT&CK framework. I'll look at it from a CIS 20 controls framework, meaning what controls were they able to beat? Okay, how do I reinforce those controls in my real environment? Because in my fake environment, they were able to get through those controls to get to a specific set of data that's not real, but it's there. Right. The idea of deception is you let someone in and you kind of watch them. Think of it like Big Brother, like the TV show, right? You put a bunch of people in a house and you've got cameras and microphones everywhere and you're watching what those people are doing. So I firmly believe that blue teams now, the modern blue team of 2021 has to be integrated with deception. And it's got to be proactive in thinking, what do we allow out there to bring people in? Just a little bit to see what they're going after, to see what tools, techniques, and processes or procedures they are using, TTPs, in attacking my organization, right? And what infrastructure are they attacking? What tools are they deploying? Meaning what malware, what ransomware are they trying to deploy? Are they doing credential stuffing? Are they crypto mining on my network? Right.
We'll have a glossary episode coming up probably in the next few months. I was talking to James about this, having a glossary episode.
Well, so for those watching, if you don't know what cyber is like right now, or just comment, say, I don't know any of the terms you just said.
And we can help.
And
you've spoken about the technical side and the deception and waiting to see what happens. I'd like to bring it back to the human side and say, for anybody out there who is a customer of any organization, which is everyone, cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. And it is not the blue teams, which we now know what blue teams are in organizations. It's not their job to help us find out what is going on with these cyber criminals and how they're trying to deceive us, because they are. Their whole point is trying to use deception and trickery at our human nature to get us to do something without thinking. So whilst James is talking about that technological area of what blue teams can do within organizations to defend and see what these cyber criminals are doing inside their systems, we need to know that when we get an email, when we see a pop-up ad or whatever it might be, when we go to engage, whether that be click a link, open an attachment, even replying to something, and it can also even be someone at your front door, people. This is not just about technology. We need to be aware of what's happening. We need to be suspicious and educate ourselves. Blue teams aren't going to sit there with their arms crossed, waiting for someone to come up to them. If they're proactively creating these opportunities to see what's going to happen should or when cyber criminals try to infiltrate their systems, cyber criminals are trying to take my data. I need to know what to look out for as well. We don't want to be human honeypots. That's an interesting term, a human honeypot. But we want to be at least educated and aware of what is going on out there, because we can't rely purely, and it's not right to rely purely on our IT teams, our blue teams, our red teams, our IT people, our cyber people. They have responsibility equal to our responsibility as people. Okay, I'm off my soapbox now, James.
No, I like how you brought it back to the human element. Charles asked a very technical question, and I felt a duty and a responsibility to answer it. I also feel like
it was a brilliant answer. It was perfect.
I think there's also the human element of we as humans are predominantly reactive human beings, right? We're not really, all the technological advancement and human advancement has made us, rather than hunters, hunted. And we do almost something very identical in our lives, in our technological lives, by being hunted. So we allow our data to be harvested for all reasons whatsoever, for just for a free service, for the idea to be able to send you a message on a social media or see what you ate for lunch. Right.
And episode 1, guys, that you can find, so make sure you subscribe. And check out episode 1 when we talked about all the privacy issues with WhatsApp and Signal and Facebook and data and free speech, etc. It was fascinating. So please check that out, because we really deep dived into.
But that's the human element of it, right? If we for a second just divest from JP Morgan Chase and that breach, and we look at it as a whole, right? There was a big miss in the JP Morgan Chase breach that was done by the media. Okay. And that was, they didn't cover the human element of the breach. They didn't talk to the actual victims, the people who got the emails, who invested. They didn't talk to the JP Morgan Chase employees who worked tirelessly, gave up nights and weekends to help, strengthen the company's cyber defense. I talked about this on Friday's Tech Corner on the Cyber Hub podcast. We recorded it today, but we talked about the cyber burnout.
Yeah. People don't realize, James, they just don't. Look, they have no idea. And unless someone tells them, they're never going to know. Should a breach occur at an organization, it is all hands on deck across the organization. And it is literally 24/7 sometimes. This isn't a matter of 9 to 5, we'll come in, we'll do our work, we'll go home. This is all encompassing. It is down tools, nothing else gets done, and it costs a fortune. You don't see it, but just the human element of how many hours people have taken from every element of the business. And I think it's something that we really do need to support more of, because it's not just the people, the users, it's also the IT team. They typically just get inundated and smashed at that time. Oh, what does Edwin have to say?
So Eddie, my co-host for the Tech Town Square that goes
I recognize his face.
Every Wednesday. I love Eddie. Eddie is.
Hi, Eddie.
I have a tendency to go with the former monarchs. So I've got an Australian on today's show, and tomorrow I've got a Brit. So, but Eddie says something here where we typically trust. I think it's built into our DNA as a survival tactic, perhaps why it's so easy for people to click on scams. So how do we make folks less trusting, or do we want a world where we don't trust? I don't know. I don't think we want a world where we less trust, and I don't think you can change humans from trusting, right? I mean, here's the deal. If humans weren't trusting, how many people have been cheated on? I'll raise my hand. I ain't afraid to admit it. I've had people cheat on me, right? Does that mean that I no longer trust the opposite sex and won't go on dates anymore, or won't get married, or won't find? We all found new relationships, right? So the idea is that we're always going to click on things. We always fall for scams. That's been going on since humans. I mean, Eve, for all intensive purposes here, this may be controversial. Eve scammed Adam to eat an apple that God said don't eat.
Yeah, but the snake told her it was good.
And the snakes scammed Eve.
I know.
That was the first Indian call center scam.
Social engineering at the snake.
That was the first Indian call center scam.
It was. Nigerian prince was a snake.
Look, Eve, just eat the apple. And Eve's like, but God said no. But he's like, he's not really looking.
And no, just do it. Eat it.
Just do it. Eat it. Take a bite. You're going to like it. It's delicious.
But on Eddie's point, I'd like to say that I take it away from cyber and go back to driving, because it's something people really everywhere around the world, we know about it. So when we look at we typically trust, and, are we just not going to be trusting? In our cars, we still wear seatbelts, because even though we trust when we get in the car that we'll drive fine and everything will be okay, we don't know what someone else is going to do. So there's a safety element that we need to do ourselves to protect ourselves. There are rules that we need to follow, and the governments have set up rules and regulations on the road. Stop signs, stop lights, give way. We drive on the right side of the road. You drive on the wrong side of the road, James, but that's okay. Eddie, you probably drive on the wrong side of the road too.
No, he doesn't. Eddie lives in the greatest country on earth, America. And in America, we drive on the right side of the road.
But see, all these things are still in place, and people still drink and drive and have accidents and die. Unfortunately, we know not to do that. However, it happens because we are human. And there's so many examples and analogies. I could just talk for days about it. But the fact is, we're still going to trust. Because as James pointed out, as humans, we're a forgiving creature. We do forgive and we move on. And some of us don't. There are some very cynical people in the world who probably even aren't online to even watch this. That's their loss, because you got to subscribe and get all the good stuff from the other side of cyber. So is it smash subscribe? I think. Hi, Hamida.
Hamida, hello.
So yeah, this is really important for people to understand. We are still going to trust. I think there's a term called trust and verify.
It's trust but verify. That was said by the great American president Ronald Reagan.
So what does that mean? Trust but verify. It means
so I trust you. I'll take your word for it, but I'm not just going to take your word for it. I'm going to go check what you just said.
Correct. And I think that's exactly. Look at fake information, disinformation, fake news, all of that stuff going on. That's another topic.
Yeah, I mean that's a whole other episode.
I'll just write that down. We'll talk about that one in the next few months.
I will say this. You brought it up, so let's really address it. This whole idea of fake news is I'm sorry to say it, but fake news has been around since man's been around.
Oh yes,
fake news is like scam and sin. We're not going to get rid of it today.
No.
Whenever you're trying to quiet an opposition side because you don't agree with it, you reinforce the side you're trying to quiet down. See, and I think that's part of it. I saw the the esteemed Alex Stamos on CNN. And if you don't know who Alex Stamos is, he's pretty much one of the biggest dumbasses on the face of the earth. I said it. And Alex Stamos was
over here. We have no idea, probably.
Alex Stamos was one of the privacy officers over at Facebook. Just founded a firm with Chris Krebs, who was the head of CISA. Oh, yeah. And they both got hired by SolarWinds to help SolarWinds deal with. Talk about. I have a whole different opinion on that one, but I will say this: he went on CNN with Brian Stelter, Mr. Potato Head. And he said that we should deplatform anyone who doesn't say something that's true.
Well, that, like you say, that'll never happen. There were soapboxes.
Right, but the fact that that's going on mainstream media and being said by people who held positions in Facebook and the former head of CISA nodding along with it is problematic. And I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. You may disagree with every political opinion someone else has. Yep. You have to allow them. The moment you silence them is the moment you make them stronger, number one. Number two, the best ideas always win. The best ideas always win. Over the long term, the best ideas win.
Well, I've made a note. We are going to talk about fake news and disinformation because I think it's something we do. So I'm literally writing that down. But guess what? We are nearly at the end of today's.
No. Why is it so fast?
I know. But the good news is the Ministry of Truth. I like that one. Is that Charles again hiding?
That is Charles hiding, and I fear anything that calls itself the Ministry of Truth.
That just says don't trust us.
Right. That's like literally like an oxymoron. Next
week. Guess what we're talking about next week, James?
What are we talking about next week? Ministry of Truth?
No. Next week, we're going to be talking about Australia and the giant cyber attack that occurred in July last year.
The one that took down like a trucking company that you guys couldn't get like food across and whatnot?
No, Orwellian. Yes, that's right, Eddie. We are in 1984. We just spoke about that book here yesterday, so that's really weird. No, I'm going to talk about the so-called attack on our continent, our beautiful land, Australia, and all the things that were going on at that time and how it all came together and really did bring a different type of conversation to us here and led to a whole lot of very interesting outcomes. So that's what we'll be talking about next week. Please subscribe, smash the like button and the subscribe button. And my son said he'd cringe each time I said that. So I'm going to have to say it every single episode because that's what a good mum does.
Yes. The more you make your kids cringe. Yes.
Exactly.
This has been a very, very fun episode. Thank you for Charles and Eddie and Hamida for commenting and participating on today's show. You guys have made it that much better and elevating it. We'll be back. We're live every single week, folks. 11 a.m. Sydney time on Wednesday morning, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Tuesday night for our U.S. crowd. And somewhere in the middle of the night, it's midnight, I think, in the UK right now. So for our British friends, the show's at midnight. So after you're done Netflixing, just turn us on and let us take you to sleep.
Go to sleep. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, we're not boring.
No, God, no, you won't sleep. So if you do want to go to sleep, don't listen.
Yeah. No. But it's brilliant. JJ, thank you so much. Folks, thanks so much for watching and tuning in to the other side of cyber, the Untold Stories. Today, we spoke about JP Morgan Chase. Share this podcast with your friends and family. Please do that as well. We're forever grateful for the support. Until next week, folks, thanks so much for watching and thanks so much for tuning in and stay cyber safe.
Yeah.